Ethan Moore had always dreamed of exploring the places that maps forgot. He was a young geologist with an adventurous spirit, someone who believed that nature still held secrets waiting to be discovered. When his university in London approved his proposal to explore a remote valley in the Amazon rainforest, he could hardly believe it. The valley had never been properly studied, and according to satellite images, it might hold one of the richest mineral deposits in South America. To Ethan, it wasn't just about the minerals, it was about discovery, curiosity, and the thrill of seeing something no one else had ever seen. He set off with a small research team, 3 scientists and 2 local guides. Their journey began on a narrow river that twisted through miles of thick forest. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became. Birds flew above in flashes of color, monkeys watched them from branches, and the hum of insects filled the air like a constant whisper. The humidity was heavy, and each step through the muddy ground felt like a struggle against the earth itself. But Ethan didn't complain. He loved the feeling of being so far from the noise of the world. After several days of traveling, they reached a place where the forest opened slightly, revealing a valley surrounded by steep cliffs. Their guides looked uneasy as they approached. One of them murmured something in Portuguese that Ethan didn't understand at first, but the tone was clear. It was a warning. The guide pointed at the cliffs and said softly, "Kaya land." Ethan had heard rumors about a hidden tribe called the Kaya, people who had lived in the forest for centuries, cut off from the modern world. He had never thought they would actually find them. When the team stepped into the valley, they saw small huts made of wood and leaves, smoke rising from fires, and figures watching them silently from a distance. The air felt heavy, not just with heat, but with caution. Ethan raised his hand slowly to show they meant no harm. The tallest man among the villagers, wearing a necklace made of carved stones, stepped forward. His eyes were sharp but calm. He was the chief. Ethan didn't know what to say, but he smiled and offered a respectful nod. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a young woman stepped out from behind the chief. She looked no older than 20, with dark eyes that seemed both kind and careful. She spoke a few words in English, her accent soft but clear. "Who are you?" she asked. Ethan felt a rush of relief. "We're scientists," he explained gently. "We study the land. We didn't mean to intrude. We're only here for a short time." The chief said something to her in their language, and she translated. "My father says you may stay one night. Then we decide." Ethan agreed, grateful for even that small chance. That night, the team set up their camp near the edge of the village. The Kaya people watched them quietly from a distance, curious but cautious. Some children peeked from behind huts, whispering and giggling. Ethan smiled and offered them some fruit from their supplies. They accepted shyly, and for a brief moment the air seemed lighter. Ayla, the chief's daughter, brought them water and stayed to talk. She told Ethan that her tribe rarely saw outsiders. They lived by the rhythm of the forest, guided by its sounds and silences. "We listen more than we speak," she said softly. "The forest hears everything." Ethan found her words poetic, even mysterious. He noticed how she paused before speaking, as if weighing each word carefully. As the night deepened, Ethan sat outside his tent, staring at the stars. The sounds of drums drifted faintly through the air, mixed with chants that he couldn't understand. It wasn't frightening, but it made him feel like he had stepped into another time. The valley seemed to hold its breath between each beat. The next morning, Ayla guided Ethan through the forest near the village. She showed him trees that oozed red sap used for healing, plants that glowed faintly under sunlight, and stones that shimmered in water. Ethan took notes and samples carefully, always asking for her permission first. He didn't want to offend her or her people. She smiled when he thanked her in her own language, though his pronunciation made her laugh quietly. They reached a tall waterfall that fell into a deep pool of crystal water. The place looked untouched and sacred. Birds flew through the mist and rainbows danced in the spray. Ethan felt a sense of awe he couldn't explain. "This is paradise," he said softly. Ayla didn't reply. Her expression changed slightly, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't. Then she pointed to a narrow path behind the waterfall. "Don't go there," she said firmly. "It is not a place for strangers." Ethan nodded but couldn't stop his curiosity from growing. Later, when they returned to camp, he kept thinking about that hidden path. What was behind the waterfall? Why had she looked afraid when she spoke about it? That evening, the chief visited their camp again. Through Ayla's translation, he asked about their purpose. Ethan explained everything honestly. Their research, the minerals, their promise to leave peacefully. The chief listened, then said something that Ayla translated carefully. You may stay 3 more days, but the valley has places you must not enter. The spirits do not forgive those who do not listen. Ethan thanked him, but the warning stayed in his mind. He didn't believe in curses or spirits, yet he respected the tribe's beliefs. Still, that hidden path behind the waterfall seemed to call him silently, as if the forest itself wanted him to uncover a secret. That night, rain fell softly on the tents. The team was tired and most had fallen asleep early. Ethan sat by the fire, writing in his journal. The flames flickered, casting shadows that danced across his face. He thought about Ayla's calm eyes and her words about silence. There was something about her that fascinated him. Her quiet strength, her connection with the forest, her way of understanding things beyond what could be seen. He closed his journal and looked toward the darkness of the valley. In the distance, he saw the faint glow of the waterfall, white against the blackness. He didn't know it yet, but his decision to follow that glow the next day would change everything. The jungle around him whispered softly, as if warning him to stay still. But curiosity, once awakened, has a voice louder than fear. And somewhere in that silent valley, the chief's daughter Ayla sat awake too, watching the same fire from afar, hoping that the strangers who had come into her world would not disturb what her people had protected for generations. The next morning began with soft sunlight falling through the trees and the sound of birds calling from far away. Ethan woke early, his mind still full of questions about the mysterious waterfall and the path behind it. The village had started its morning chores. Women were grinding seeds, children were carrying water, and men were repairing fishing nets by the river. Life in the Kaya tribe moved calmly, as if time itself had slowed down inside their hidden valley. Ayla arrived with breakfast, a bowl of tropical fruits and roasted roots. She smiled politely and asked if Ethan had slept well. Yes, he replied, though it wasn't true. He had barely slept at all, thinking about what she had said the day before. The words still echoed in his mind. Don't go there. It is not a place for strangers. He tried to start a casual conversation, asking her more about the village, the people, and their traditions. She answered patiently, though carefully. Our tribe believes the forest is alive, she said. Every sound it makes is like a word. When the forest is quiet, it means we must be quiet too. Ethan smiled. You mean silence has meaning here? Yes, she said, lowering her voice. Sometimes silence saves us. Her words made him pause. He didn't understand fully, but he could feel their weight. Still, curiosity pushed at the edges of his thoughts. What could possibly be behind that waterfall that made the tribe so cautious? Later that day, Ethan and his team were mapping mineral samples near the cliffs. The chief's men watched them from a distance, making sure they didn't wander too far. Ethan kept glancing toward the line of trees that led to the waterfall. Every time he looked, it seemed to shimmer a little more brightly in the sunlight, almost inviting him to come closer. When the team packed up for the afternoon, Ethan told them he wanted to take one last look around the area before heading back. The others were tired and didn't argue. They started toward the village while Ethan turned quietly toward the sound of falling water. The forest was thick and green, filled with the scent of wet leaves and the distant call of unseen birds. His boots sank softly into the damp soil as he walked. The closer he got to the waterfall, the cooler the air became. The roar of the water grew louder, drowning out every other sound. When he reached it, he felt a rush of awe again. The way the sunlight broke into rainbows through the mist looked magical. He looked around carefully. No one seemed to be there. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the curtain of falling water. Cold droplets hit his face, and for a moment everything blurred. Behind the wall of water, he found a narrow opening in the rock, a passage just wide enough for one person. He hesitated. Ayla's warning echoed in his mind. But curiosity, mixed with the thrill of discovery, urged him forward. He turned on his flashlight and entered. Inside, the air was cool and damp. The sound of dripping water echoed softly through the space. The walls were covered in carvings, images of people, animals, and swirling shapes that looked like flames or wind. Ethan reached out and brushed the dust away from one section. The carvings told a story. He could see figures arriving from boats carrying strange objects and then others falling ill or running away. It looked like a warning carved into stone long ago. As he moved deeper into the cave, the light from the entrance faded. He found what seemed to be a sealed stone doorway, carved with more symbols, circles, lines, and faces with closed eyes. It felt ancient, untouched. He didn't open anything or move the stones, but as he leaned closer to take a picture, he heard a faint sound, a low, hollow vibration, almost like a breath coming from the ground itself. He froze. For a moment, it felt as if the air itself was alive, pulsing with invisible energy. Then the sound faded again. Ethan stepped back slowly. He felt no danger, only a deep sense that this place was sacred, that it held something greater than human understanding. When he turned to leave, he saw something at the corner of his eye, a piece of cloth lying near the wall. It looked old, but he noticed a symbol stitched into it, the same pattern that Ayla wore on her necklace. He picked it up gently, wondering what it meant. When he stepped out of the cave and back into daylight, the forest looked different. The sky was darker, the wind stronger. He felt uneasy, as if the valley itself was watching him. By the time he returned to the village, the atmosphere had changed. People were whispering, moving quickly between huts. The chief stood near the fire, his expression hard. Ayla was there too, her face pale with worry. When she saw Ethan, she ran toward him. "Where were you?" she asked in a sharp whisper. Ethan hesitated. "I just went for a short walk near the waterfall," he said carefully. Her eyes widened. "Did you go behind it?" He didn't answer right away. That was enough of an answer. She covered her mouth and looked toward her father. The chief's gaze turned toward Ethan, full of questions that needed no words. Ethan felt a rush of guilt. He hadn't meant to offend anyone. "I didn't touch anything," he said quickly. "I only looked." "I'm sorry." Ayla translated his words, but the chief didn't reply immediately. He said something in their language, low and firm. The villagers stopped moving and turned toward him. The air grew thick with tension. Ayla turned back to Ethan and spoke in a trembling voice. "My father says the cave you entered is sacred. It is believed that if someone disturbs its silence, the balance of the valley will break. The spirits will not rest." Ethan tried to explain that he didn't mean harm, that he respected their customs, but it was no use. The chief turned away, giving orders to the villagers. The torches around the camp were lit early that evening, and everyone moved with quiet urgency. Ethan's team, confused and nervous, gathered near their tents. "What's happening?" one of them asked. Ethan didn't know how to answer. He only said, "They think I broke a rule." Ayla stayed close, whispering softly, "My people believe sound awakens what sleeps in the earth. Tonight we must stay silent. No words, no noise. If the valley accepts your silence, maybe you will be forgiven." The sun went down slowly, and the forest began to hum with strange sounds, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of night insects, and the soft whistle of wind through the trees. It felt like the entire valley was waiting for something. As darkness wrapped around the village, Ayla looked at Ethan one last time and said quietly, "When the night begins, speak no word. Promise me this." Ethan nodded, unsure of what the night would bring. He felt the weight of her words pressing on his chest. Somewhere deep inside, he knew he had crossed a line that curiosity should never have crossed. When the first drum sounded from the center of the village, a chill ran down his spine. The people of the Kaya gathered around the fire in complete silence, their faces painted with symbols that seemed to glow in the firelight. The chief raised his hand and all movement stopped. Ethan looked around. Even the forest seemed silent now. No birds, no insects, not even the sound of water from the waterfall. It was as if the whole valley was holding its breath. And then Ayla turned toward him, her eyes wide with fear. The silence had begun. Night had fully fallen over the hidden valley, wrapping the forest and village in a thick, quiet darkness. The only light came from small fires set in the village's central area, casting soft, flickering shadows over the huts and the trees. Ethan sat quietly near the edge of the camp, his notebook closed on his lap. He had promised Ayla he would not speak, but he felt every muscle in his body tense, his curiosity pushing against the rules he had been asked to follow. The Kaya people had gathered around the fire, forming a large circle. Their faces were painted with traditional designs, and their eyes reflected the flames. Children were sitting quietly, their small hands clasped together. Everyone was watching, yet not a single word was spoken. The drum beats began slowly, a soft rhythm that seemed to echo from the ground itself. Ethan realized that this was no ordinary drum. It was a heartbeat of the valley, a sound that carried with it both power and meaning. Ayla sat close to him, her hand brushing his lightly. "Do not speak," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If you do, it will upset everything. Promise me." Ethan nodded solemnly. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him. This was not just about following a rule. It was about respecting something far older and deeper than him, something he could not fully understand. As the night wore on, the forest around them seemed to change. The usual sounds of insects and distant animals had stopped. Even the river's gentle flow seemed quieter, as if the valley itself had fallen silent. The drumbeats continued, slow and steady, a rhythm that made Ethan's heart race in time with it. He looked around and saw that the villagers were completely still, some with eyes closed, some staring into the fire, all perfectly in tune with the silent language of the forest. Minutes passed like hours. Ethan could feel every sound he made, the rustle of his clothing, the soft shift of his feet on the ground. He realized that even his own breathing could disturb the delicate balance of the night. Ayla kept her eyes on him, her expression both anxious and determined. She knew that the smallest mistake could undo the trust the tribe had placed in them. Suddenly, a faint wind blew through the trees, carrying the scent of wet earth and flowers. Ethan noticed that some leaves moved in patterns that almost seemed deliberate, like the forest was trying to communicate. He held his breath, not daring to speak, and felt an unexpected connection to the world around him. For the first time in his life, he understood what Ayla had meant about the forest being alive. It was listening. Hours passed with the same slow rhythm. The drumbeats grew softer, blending with the sound of the fire crackling. Ethan's mind wandered, thinking about the cave and the carvings he had seen earlier. What stories had those walls told? What warning had been carved into stone centuries ago? He realized that the silence he had been asked to keep was not just a test. It was a way of showing respect to something that could not be measured or explained. At one point, a small child in the circle moved slightly. Trying to adjust their position, the chief's hand went up gently, signaling the child to stay still. The child froze instantly, eyes wide, understanding without words what was expected. Ethan watched in awe, realizing how deeply ingrained this culture of listening and silence was. It was not fear, it was understanding, a form of communication far beyond what he had known. Hours continued to pass, and the team remained in silence, their minds alert to every sound, every movement. Ethan felt a strange mix of anxiety and calm. Anxiety because one wrong sound could disrupt the delicate balance, and calm because he had never felt more alive, more connected to the world around him. Ayla's hand occasionally brushed his arm, a quiet reminder that she was there, guiding him through the unspoken rules of this strange and wonderful night. At one point, he thought he heard a whisper from behind him, but he quickly realized it was only the wind moving through the leaves. His body tensed and he caught himself holding his breath, realizing how careful he had become without even thinking about it. The night had changed him. He had entered the valley as a curious outsider, but now he was learning to listen, to observe, and to understand a world that did not need words to communicate its power. Then, in the faint light of the fire, he saw movement near the edge of the circle. A small group of villagers was moving carefully, carrying baskets filled with glowing fruits and herbs. They placed them around the fire, and Ethan noticed that each movement was precise, deliberate, and performed with great care. The objects seemed ordinary, yet the way they were handled made it clear they held meaning. The villagers were performing a ritual, a silent ceremony of respect and gratitude. Ethan could not help but feel honored to witness it. He realized that everything he had been taught about science and exploration was only a small part of understanding the world. Here in this hidden valley, there were truths that could not be measured by instruments or written in journals. They could only be felt, understood, and respected. As the night deepened further, the chief rose slowly, holding a staff carved with symbols that glowed faintly in the firelight. He moved to the center of the circle, raising his hands gently. The drumbeat slowed to a near stop. Ethan watched, holding his breath, as the chief placed the staff in a small stone pedestal and stepped back. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the flames of the fire seemed to shift, casting patterns on the ground that resembled the carvings Ethan had seen in the cave. Ayla leaned close to him and whispered, "Do you see? The valley is speaking to us." Ethan nodded, awestruck. He could feel the power of the moment, the connection between the people, the land, and the unseen forces that had protected this place for generations. Hours passed, and the first signs of dawn began to appear on the horizon. The sky lightened slowly, turning from dark blue to pale pink. The villagers began to move gently, maintaining their silence. The drumbeat ceased entirely, leaving only the soft sound of birds beginning to sing. Ethan could feel a sense of relief in the air. The night had been survived, and the valley had accepted their silence. Ayla smiled at him for the first time that night, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "You listened," she said softly. "You did not speak, and the valley accepted you. That is why we are still here." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest. He realized that the night had changed him in ways he could not yet explain. He had come seeking discovery and knowledge, but he had learned something far more important: respect, patience, and the power of listening. The silence had taught him more than words ever could. As the sun rose fully, the forest began to hum with life again. Birds chirped, insects buzzed, and the waterfall gushed loudly in the distance. The valley was awake, and the people moved with it, smiling quietly and speaking softly. Ethan knew that he had been given a rare gift, a glimpse into a world that existed in perfect balance, a world that would remain a secret if he respected it. And as he looked at Ayla, standing beside him, he knew that their journey was far from over. The night had passed, but the mysteries of the valley still awaited discovery. With careful steps, patience, and respect, he would continue to learn from this hidden world, understanding that some secrets were meant to be approached with silence before words. The morning after the silent night was calm, almost eerily so. The forest seemed to breathe slowly, as if the events of the previous night had left a mark on the valley itself. Ethan woke before the sun fully rose, feeling a mix of excitement and unease. Though the night had passed without incident, he knew that the valley still held many secrets, and he sensed that the next steps would require even more care. Ayla was already awake, walking quietly through the edge of the village. She spotted Ethan and motioned for him to follow. "Come," she said softly. "There are things you need to see before the day begins." Ethan nodded, careful not to make any sudden movements. The forest was alive with early morning sounds, birds calling, leaves rustling, and the distant murmur of the waterfall. Yet everything felt measured, as if the valley was watching them. Ayla led him to the river, where a small raft was hidden under a thick layer of branches and leaves. "This is our way out if something goes wrong," she explained. Ethan felt a rush of gratitude and worry at the same time. He had not expected to be offered an escape route, yet the careful thought behind it made him realize how serious the Kaya people were about protecting their land. As they prepared the raft, Ayla looked around nervously. "The chief has allowed us to leave for a moment," she whispered. "But you must follow me exactly. No mistakes. Do not speak. Do not draw attention." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The promise he had made the night before was more important now than ever. One careless word could undo everything. They began their journey along the riverbank, moving slowly and quietly. Ethan noticed how every step was calculated. No branches were broken, no leaves crushed underfoot. Ayla led the way, glancing behind her occasionally to ensure they were not being watched. Ethan felt a strange sense of awe at her skill. She moved through the forest as if she were part of it, her presence blending perfectly with the surroundings. As they approached a narrow bend in the river, Ethan saw a faint figure in the shadows ahead. A villager was standing silently, watching them carefully. Ayla immediately gestured for him to stop and crouch. They pressed themselves against the riverbank, hidden by thick foliage. Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he stayed still, careful not to breathe too loudly. The figure remained for a moment, then slowly turned and walked away. Ethan exhaled quietly, realizing how close they had been to being discovered. Ayla gave him a reassuring nod. "You must understand," she said softly, "that the valley is always watching. It is not dangerous in the way you think, but it tests everyone who enters. Only those who move with care are allowed to see its secrets." They continued along the river until they reached the waterfall again. This time Ethan looked at the narrow passage behind it with new understanding. He knew now why the chief had been so protective. The cave was not just a place of mystery. It was a place of balance. To disturb it carelessly could disrupt everything the tribe had worked to protect for generations. Ayla turned to him and whispered, "We must go through it quickly. Stay close, follow my lead. One wrong step could bring attention." Ethan nodded and they entered the curtain of falling water. The cool spray washed over them and the sound of the waterfall was deafening. Yet inside the small passage the world seemed quieter, almost sacred. Inside the cave, Ethan noticed the carvings again, the ancient figures, the swirling shapes, and the faces with closed eyes. But this time, he paid attention to the details he had missed before. Each carving seemed to tell a story of care and respect, of learning from the land rather than taking from it. Ethan felt a deep sense of connection, as if the voices of the past were guiding him, showing him the path he must follow. They moved carefully through the cave, step by step until they reached a small opening that led back to the river. Ethan breathed a quiet sigh of relief. The raft was just ahead, hidden among reeds and branches. Ayla checked the surroundings once more before guiding him onto it. The raft floated silently on the calm water, moving downstream with a gentle current. As they drifted along, Ethan noticed how alert Ayla remained. She watched the forest edges, listening to the sounds of the valley, her body poised for any movement. He realized that her skills were not just about survival. They were about respect and understanding. She had learned to read the world in ways he had never imagined. Hours passed as they floated quietly, following the bends of the river. The forest seemed to grow taller, denser, and more mysterious with each passing mile. Occasionally, a bird would take flight, or a small animal would scurry across the riverbank, but nothing disturbed the calm of the valley. Ethan marveled at the beauty around him, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, the reflections in the water, and the sense of life that pulsed through every tree and stone. Then, in the distance, Ethan saw a faint light on the riverbank. His heart skipped a beat. Ayla whispered, "Stay calm. That is the chief." Ethan froze as he realized what she meant. The chief had followed them silently, ensuring their safety. Yet he did not approach directly. He remained at a distance, watching without words. The gesture spoke volumes. The chief trusted them enough to leave them on their own, but he remained vigilant, a silent guardian of the valley. Ethan felt a rush of gratitude and respect. He understood now that the balance of the valley was maintained not by fear but by care, attentiveness, and the willingness to move quietly and respectfully. He had learned lessons that went far beyond geology or exploration. As they continued downstream, the raft drifted into a section of the river where the water widened and slowed. Ayla pointed to a narrow path leading into a small hidden inlet. "This is safe," she said quietly. "From here we can return without being seen." Ethan followed her, keeping his movements slow and careful. Every branch he touched, every stone he stepped on, he did so with intention and respect. Finally, they reached a small clearing where the forest opened slightly. Ethan could see the sunlight falling through the trees, warm and golden. It felt like a reward for their careful journey. They stepped onto the bank, and Ayla led them to a narrow trail that would take them back to the edge of the valley. Before they continued, Ethan turned to her. "Thank you," he whispered, careful to keep his voice low. "I would never have made it without you." Ayla smiled, her eyes calm but serious. "You have learned something important tonight," she said. "Curiosity is good, but respect is greater. The valley will forgive mistakes only when it is shown understanding. Remember this." Ethan nodded, feeling a deep sense of humility. He had come seeking discovery and knowledge, but he had gained far more. He had learned about patience, silence, and the delicate balance of life. He understood that some places could not be rushed, that some secrets demanded respect rather than intrusion. As they walked the final stretch back to the village, the sounds of the valley returned, and birds singing, leaves rustling, and the river flowing gently. Ethan realized that he had changed. He was no longer just a visitor. He was someone who had glimpsed a world that existed in harmony, a world where every action had meaning and every silence spoke volumes. When they reached the village, the chief was waiting. He did not speak, but he nodded once slowly, acknowledging their safe return. Ayla translated the gesture for Ethan. "He sees that you have learned to move with care. The valley accepts you." Ethan felt a sense of relief and wonder wash over him. The night of silence, the journey through the cave, and the careful escape along the river had taught him lessons he would never forget. He realized that the true treasure of the valley was not the minerals, Not the carvings, but the understanding it demanded, respect, patience, and the ability to listen without speaking. And as he looked at Ayla, standing beside him with a calm smile, he knew that their journey was far from over. There were still mysteries to uncover, but he had learned the most important lesson of all. Some secrets were revealed only to those who moved with care and listened with their hearts. The sun had risen high in the sky, casting warm light over the hidden valley. The village was alive with activity. Children ran to fetch water, women prepared food near the fires, and the men moved silently but efficiently, maintaining the balance of their home. Ethan and his team were ready to leave the valley, but a quiet tension remained in the air. The events of the past nights had left a deep mark on everyone, especially Ethan, who had learned lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. Ayla met him at the edge of the village, her expression calm but serious. "Today you leave," she said softly. "Remember everything you have learned. Respect is the most important thing in this valley. Never forget it." Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and gratitude. He had grown attached to this place, and to the people who had welcomed him despite the risks he had taken. The journey back to the river was quiet. Ethan's team followed closely, carrying their equipment carefully and moving with the same care they had learned from Ayla. Each step felt deliberate, each movement intentional. The forest around them seemed to watch silently, as if approving their respect and caution. Ethan realized that he no longer felt like an outsider. He had become part of the rhythm of the valley, even if only briefly. When they reached the raft hidden in the reeds, Ethan paused. He looked back toward the village, toward the waterfall, and toward the cave that had held so many mysteries. The carvings he had seen, the warnings and messages etched into stone, were no longer just objects of curiosity. They were reminders of the lessons he had learned: patience, respect, and the power of silence. Ayla helped them onto the raft, guiding them carefully into the gentle current of the river. Ethan noticed how she moved with ease, her confidence and knowledge of the forest evident in every step. He understood now why the chief trusted her so completely. She had learned to read the world in ways that went far beyond words, and her guidance had kept them safe through the night of silence and the journey down the river. As the raft drifted downstream, the valley slowly began to fade from view. The cliffs and trees receded, and the forest seemed to stretch endlessly beyond the riverbanks. Ethan felt a strange mixture of relief and longing. He was glad to have survived the challenges of the past few days, but he also knew he was leaving behind something extraordinary, something that could never be fully shared with anyone who had not experienced it. During the journey, Ayla remained quiet, her eyes scanning the forest with the same careful attention she had shown throughout their time in the valley. Occasionally, she would point out a tree, a plant, or an animal, explaining its significance without breaking the calm of their passage. Ethan listened closely, absorbing everything she said, knowing that these small details were part of a larger understanding that the Kaya people had cultivated for generations. Hours passed, and the raft finally reached the edge of the forest, where the trees thinned and the sounds of the valley began to fade. Ethan felt a pang of sadness as the hidden world they had navigated disappeared from view. He realized that the lessons of the valley were not something he could take with him physically. They lived in the way one moved, the way one listened, and the way one respected the balance of the natural world. When they reached the main trail that would lead them back to the outside world, Ethan turned to Ayla. "Thank you," he said softly, careful not to break the quiet respect of the moment. "I will never forget what I have learned here. I will always remember the silence, the way the valley speaks, and everything you have taught me." Ayla smiled gently. "The valley will always be here," she said, "but you must remember that its secrets are not for everyone. You have been given a gift. Use it wisely. Speak only when necessary and always listen first." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth of her words resonate deeply within him. He had come seeking knowledge, but he had found understanding. He realized that some discoveries were not meant to be shared with the world, that some truths existed to teach respect and humility rather than to impress or amaze. The team continued along the trail, moving steadily toward the edge of the forest. The sounds of the outside world, distant voices, vehicles, and human activity grew louder with each step. Ethan felt the contrast sharply. The hidden valley had been a place of balance and quiet wisdom, while the world beyond was noisy, chaotic, and often careless. He understood that he would carry the lessons of the valley wherever he went, guiding his actions and decisions in ways that others might not understand. When they finally emerged from the forest, a small research station awaited them. The team members were relieved, and yet there was a quiet sense of reverence in their demeanor. They had experienced something extraordinary, something that went beyond any scientific measurement or report. The valley had tested them, taught them, and now it was time to return to the world beyond its protective boundaries. Before leaving, Ethan looked back toward the forest one last time. He thought of the chief, who had guided his people with wisdom and patience, and of Ayla, whose careful guidance had ensured their safe passage. He thought of the cave, the carvings, the waterfall, and the lessons of silence. He realized that the most important discovery of all was not in the minerals, the maps, or the photographs. It was in understanding the value of respect, patience, and listening to the world around you. As they boarded a small vehicle that would take them back to the nearest town, Ethan felt a sense of calm determination. He knew that he had been given a rare opportunity, one that would shape the way he approached life, work, and the natural world. He also knew that the valley's secrets must remain protected. The lessons were for him to carry, not for the world to exploit. Days later, Ethan returned home, but the memories of the valley remained vivid. He kept a small journal, recording not the details of the minerals or the terrain, but the lessons of silence, observation, and respect. He wrote about the careful movements of the Kaya people, the rhythm of the night, the whispers of the forest, and the guidance of Ayla. He knew that these experiences had changed him, shaping his understanding of life and the way he approached challenges. Even years later, Ethan would occasionally dream of the valley. In his dreams, the waterfall glistened under the sun. The cave held its silent carvings, and Ayla's calm, guiding presence reminded him of the importance of listening before acting. He never returned to the hidden valley. He knew some places were meant to remain secret, protected by silence and respect. But the lessons he had learned continued to guide him every day, and sometimes, when the world felt too loud, too hurried, or too careless, Ethan would pause, close his eyes, and remember the silent night in the hidden valley. He would feel the rhythm of the drums, the flicker of the fire, and the careful movements of the Kaya people. He would remember Ayla's words. Curiosity is good, but respect is greater. Ethan understood that the true gift of the valley was not a discovery that could be measured, written, or shared. It was a way of seeing the world, a way of moving through life with care and mindfulness, a reminder that some secrets are precious because they teach patience, humility, and understanding. Years later, when people asked him about his time in the Amazon, he would smile quietly and say only this: "I learned to listen first, the rest will follow," and that was enough.